My father told me the day I got my acceptance letter to medical school that I should think carefully before embarrassing the family. He didn't say congratulations, he didn't hug me. He looked at the envelope in my hand and said, "You know your brother is already 2 years ahead of you. Don't make things awkward." I was 22. I had worked 4 years of undergrad carrying a 3.94 GPA while waitressing Friday and Saturday nights at a Greek restaurant on Robson Street to pay for my own textbooks. My brother had a car our parents bought him. He had a condo they co-signed. He had a name, my father's name, and in our family, that meant everything. My name is Wren. And for most of my adult life, that name didn't mean much to anyone in my family except a problem they weren't sure how to categorize. I'm a cardiac surgeon, or I am now. Getting here took 11 years. A broken engagement, one very public humiliation in front of 32 colleagues, and a moment in a hospital boardroom that I will never forget as long as I live. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My brother Owen is 4 years older than me. Growing up in North Vancouver, he was the kind of kid teachers remembered and neighbors complimented at block parties. He was charming in that effortless way that some people are just born into, the kind of charm that never has to work hard because the world keeps meeting it halfway. Our father, a cardiothoracic surgeon at Vancouver General, groomed Owen from the time he could hold a stethoscope, literally. There's a photo on the mantel of my parents' house. Owen, maybe 6 years old, holding our father's stethoscope to a stuffed bear's chest. Both of them are grinning. I'm standing at the edge of the frame, slightly out of focus, holding a book. I don't think my parents even noticed I was in that photo for years. Owen did go into cardiology, followed our father into the same hospital system, the same subspecialty, when Owen matched into his residency at St. Paul's, my father cried. Actual tears. He called relatives in Halifax. He opened a bottle of wine he'd been saving since 1998. When I matched into my surgical residency 2 years later, general surgery first, then the cardiothoracic fellowship I'd been working toward, my mother made pasta for dinner, and my father asked me to please not schedule anything on the same weekend as Owen's residency graduation, because that was already going to be a big family event. I said sure. I ate my pasta. I went home to my apartment on Cambie and I sat on the bathroom floor for a while. That was just how things were. The hospital where this story really begins is a research and teaching hospital in the Lower Mainland. I won't name it specifically, but if you work in cardiac surgery anywhere in BC, you know it. Owen had been on staff there for 3 years by the time I joined as a fellow. I knew it was going to be complicated. I told myself I could handle it. I was 31, I had done 6 years of residency, I had assisted on over 200 open heart procedures, and I genuinely believed that skill was the thing that mattered most. I was right about skill mattering. I was naive about everything else. My first week on the fellowship, Owen introduced me to a group of his colleagues in the attendings lounge. He did it the way you introduce someone's kid sister who has showed up somewhere she maybe shouldn't have. "This is my little sister," he said. "She's joining the fellowship program. Be nice." He said be nice the way you say it to children at a birthday party. One of the attendings, a man named Dr. Hargrove, looked me up and down and said, "Following in the family footsteps. That's sweet." Sweet. I was a surgical fellow with a research publication already in circulation. Sweet, I smiled. I shook his hand. I went and found the on-call room and I gave myself exactly 4 minutes to be furious about it. Then I went back to work. The research piece is where things get complicated, and it's the part I have the hardest time talking about even now. About 8 months into my fellowship, I started developing a modified closure technique for a specific type of aortic repair. It came out of a problem I kept seeing in post-op patients, a particular pattern of complications that the existing literature hadn't addressed cleanly. I started documenting it on my own time. Evenings, weekends. I pulled data from old case files. I ran the statistical analysis myself. I drafted a preliminary protocol and brought it to Owen because he was senior, because I trusted him, and because I think, underneath everything, I still wanted him to look at something I'd done and tell our father about it. Owen read it. He got very quiet in the way that means he's thinking hard. Then he said, "This is interesting. Let me take it to Dr. Hargrove. He has the connections to get this into a proper study." I said, "Okay." I said, "Thank you." 3 months later, there was a study. It had 3 authors: Dr. Perv, Hargrove, my brother Owen, and a research coordinator I'd never met. My name was not on it. I found out at a department meeting when Dr. Hargrove stood up and presented the preliminary findings of a novel aortic closure protocol developed in collaboration with Dr. Protocol Owen Calloway, my brother's last name, my father's last name, the name that opened every door in this hospital system. I sat in that meeting and I did not move. I kept my face completely still. I am very good at keeping my face still when everything underneath it is falling apart. Afterward, I went to Owen. I asked him directly. He said, "Wren, you're a fellow. If your name had been on it, people would have questioned the credibility. I was protecting the work." He said, "Protecting the work," like he was doing me a favor. I said, "That's my protocol, Owen." He said, "It's better this way. You'll understand when you're in attending." I left his office. I went to the bathroom on the 4th floor that nobody uses, and I stood at the sink and ran cold water over my wrists for a long time. Then I made a decision. I didn't file a formal complaint. Not yet. I didn't send an email. I didn't go to my program director. I know that might be hard to understand. Why didn't I fight it right then? But I had no documentation in any official system. Owen had credibility, connections, and our father's name. I was a fellow 18 months from completion, and the complaint process for research misconduct in academic medicine is long and brutal and rarely kind to the person at the bottom of the hierarchy. So I did something else instead. I kept working, and I started keeping records. Every case I contributed to significantly, I documented in a private folder. Every email I sent with clinical ideas, I saved. Every time I was in an OR and made a call that changed the outcome, I wrote it down that same night with the date and the case number and exactly what I did. I kept a log on an encrypted drive I stored at my apartment. I also started talking to a staff cardiologist named Dr. Abioy, who ran the hospital's research ethics board and who had, on 2 separate occasions, nodded at me across a seminar room in a way that suggested she saw more than most people did. I didn't tell her what had happened. I just started showing up to the ethics board's open sessions, learning the process, understanding what a formal documentation trail would need to look like. I waited. I worked. I was very, very quiet. Here's what nobody tells you about being quiet in a place where people expect you to disappear. Eventually, they stop watching. Owen stopped being careful around me because he thought I'd accepted it. Dr. Hargrove barely registered my presence at department meetings. My father, when he visited the hospital for a lecture series, introduced me to 3 of his old colleagues as Owen's sister, also in the program. I smiled. I shook hands. I went back to work. The study was published in a peer-reviewed journal 11 months after that department meeting. It was a significant publication, the kind that gets cited, the kind that puts names on the map. Owen's name was on it. Hargrove's name was on it. Mine was nowhere. The week after publication, there was a small celebration in the attendings lounge. Someone brought a cake. I was not invited, but I walked past the open door on my way to the ICU, and I saw my father standing there with Owen, both of them holding coffee cups, both of them laughing. That was the hardest moment. Not the publication, not the meeting. That. Standing in a hallway watching my father celebrate my work with my brother, not knowing, and maybe. I have thought about this a lot, not wanting to know. I kept walking. What changed things was not something I engineered. I want to be clear about that. I did not set a trap. I did not scheme. What I did was work until my work became impossible to ignore, and then I let the truth be exactly what it was. 6 months before the end of my fellowship, the hospital entered a partnership evaluation with a major cardiac research network based in Toronto, the kind of collaboration that brings funding, infrastructure, prestige. A team was coming from the network to assess the hospital's research capacity. They were going to spend 2 days reviewing current projects, meeting researchers, and identifying where to focus the partnership investment. The team was led by a woman named Dr. Owen, who was the scientific director of the network and one of the most cited cardiac researchers in the country. I had read her work since my second year of residency. She had developed a repair methodology that influenced my own thinking in ways I could trace directly. The assessment team arrived on a Tuesday. I was not on the formal meeting list. Fellows weren't. I was scheduled for 2 OR shifts during the 2 days they were on site. On Wednesday morning, I was leading a teaching case, a complex aortic root replacement on a patient whose anatomy was unusual enough that 2 of the attendings had flagged it as high risk. I had scrubbed in as primary because my fellow supervisor had a conflict, and I had been tracking this patient for 6 weeks. I knew his imaging. I knew the approach I was going to take. What I didn't know was that Dr. Ewan's team had asked to observe a live surgical case as part of their assessment, and the case they were brought to was mine. They stood in the gallery. I didn't know they were there until I was already 2 hours in, and the circulating nurse mentioned it between instrument exchanges. I didn't look up. I had a patient open on the table, and there was exactly one thing that mattered. The case took 4 hours and 12 minutes. It went well. The adaptation I made mid-procedure, a decision point that 2 colleagues later told me was exactly the right call at exactly the right moment, was something I had thought through before I even scrubbed in. Afterward, I was in the scrub sink when someone touched my arm lightly. I turned around. It was Dr. Ewan. She said, "That was your closure technique." Not a question. I looked at her for a moment. I said, "I'm sorry," she said. "The modified approach in the distal anastomosis, I read it in Hargrove's publication. But watching you just now, that came from somewhere specific. That was yours." My throat did something complicated. I said, "I developed the original protocol, yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Is your name on the paper?" I said, "No." She nodded, very slowly, like someone confirming something they already suspected. Then she said, "I'd like to sit down with you this afternoon, if you have time. I have some questions about your research." That afternoon meeting lasted 3 hours. I brought my encrypted drive. I had, without really planning for this specific moment, created exactly the kind of documentation trail that Dr. Abio had once described to the ethics board as the difference between an allegation and a case. Dr. Ewan went through it carefully. She asked precise questions. She was not warm in a performative way. She was warm in the way that people are when they are taking you seriously, which is the only kind of warmth that has ever meant anything to me. At the end, she said, "I'm going to need to speak with the Chief of Surgery and the Research Ethics Board before we finalize the partnership assessment. There are some things that need to be resolved first." I said, "I understand." She said, "For what it's worth, this protocol is good work. It's going to help people." I drove home that night and sat in my car in the parking garage for a long time before I could make myself go upstairs. The formal process took 4 months. I won't describe all of it because some of it is still difficult and some of it is not mine alone to tell. What I will say is this. The Research Ethics Board reviewed my documentation. The network's own review team conducted an independent assessment of the publication record. Owen was placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. Dr. Hargrove retired, officially voluntarily 2 months ahead of schedule. My name was added to the publication as primary contributor. There was a correction notice issued in the journal. These things don't get a lot of public fanfare. In academic medicine, a correction notice is both everything and very quiet. My father called me the week the correction was issued. He was silent for a long time after I answered. Then he said, "Why didn't you come to me?" I said, "Would you have believed me?" He didn't answer right away. That silence told me more than any answer would have. He said eventually I should have paid more attention. That's the closest I have ever heard my father come to an apology. I sat with it. I let it be what it was. Imperfect, late, still partially about him. And I decided it was enough. Not because he deserved for it to be enough. Because I was tired of carrying the weight of his recognition, and I was ready to put it down. The network partnership moved forward. The hospital signed a 5-year agreement with Dr. Ewan's organization. Part of the agreement included funding for a new research initiative in aortic repair methodology. I was asked to lead it. There was a small announcement at a department meeting in March. I stood at the front of the room in the same seat where I had once watched Dr. Hargrove present my work with my brother's name on it. The chief of surgery read a short statement. A few people clapped. Dr. Abiwe, sitting in the third row, gave me a nod that I will remember for the rest of my career. Afterward, in the hallway, my father found me. He had been at the meeting, he still had privileges at the hospital, still came for lectures and committee meetings. He stood in front of me and he looked at me in a way I don't have the right words for, like he was seeing me arrange into focus after years of blur. He said, "I'm proud of you." I said, "I know." I didn't say thank you, not because I wanted to punish him, but because I had spent a very long time waiting for that sentence, and somewhere along the way I had stopped needing it. I had found something steadier to stand on. He nodded. He put his hand briefly on my shoulder. Then he walked toward the elevator. I watched him go. I thought about the girl who sat at the edge of a photograph, slightly out of focus, holding a book. I thought about the bathroom on the 4th floor that nobody uses. I thought about 4 hours and 12 minutes in an OR with people watching from a gallery, and the moment I heard that was yours from someone who could see it. Then I went back to my office. I had a research meeting at 2 and I had work to do. I think about that photograph a lot, the one on my parents' mantle. Owen with the stethoscope, my father grinning, and me at the edge of the frame, slightly out of focus, holding a book. Nobody moved me out of that shot. I just wasn't the one anyone was looking at. For a long time, I thought that was something I needed to fix. That if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, published enough, someone in my family would eventually turn the camera toward me. What I didn't understand then, what took me the better part of a decade to learn, is that waiting for someone else to focus the lens on you is a way of handing them control over what you amount to. Owen took my research because he believed I would absorb it quietly. And for a while, he was right. But there's a difference between absorbing something and deciding how to respond to it. I didn't go silent because I accepted what he did. I went quiet because I was thinking, because I was building something he couldn't touch, a record, a foundation, a version of myself that didn't need his permission to exist. That distinction matters. I've heard people say that staying quiet means letting someone win. I don't think that's true. Silence can be the most deliberate thing you do. It can be the space where you figure out exactly what kind of person you want to be when the moment finally arrives. And the moment does arrive, not because the universe is keeping score in any mystical sense, but because choices accumulate. Owen made choices. To take credit for work that wasn't his. To count on my silence. To believe that his name and our father's connections were a permanent ceiling above me. I made choices too. To document carefully. To learn the ethics process. To keep showing up in that OR with everything I had. The outcome wasn't magic. It was the logical end of two very different sets of decisions running alongside each other until they finally met. Dr. Ewan didn't rescue me. She saw something that was already there. That's an important distinction too. The people who ultimately helped me, her, Dr. Abioye, they didn't create my credibility. They recognized it. Which means the credibility had to exist first. It had to be real, and it had to be mine. Built without shortcuts, without borrowed names, without anyone else's ceiling telling me where to stop. I'm not interested in telling anyone that being a good person guarantees a good outcome. That's not what happened to me, and I won't dress it up. What I'll say is this. When Dr. Ewan looked at me across that scrub sink and said that was yours, she was right. It was mine because I had done it honestly, because I had stayed curious enough to see a problem no one else was solving, disciplined enough to document it properly, and stubborn enough to keep going when every signal in my environment told me to shrink. Those three things, doing right by the work, thinking clearly, and refusing to stop, they didn't guarantee anything, but they meant that when the truth finally had room to surface, there was something real underneath it. I went back to my office that March afternoon after the department meeting. I had a research call at 2. The window in my office faces west, and the light was coming in at that particular late winter angle that makes Vancouver look like it's made of silver. I sat down. I opened my laptop. I started working. That felt like enough.